Hello everybody, so I'm George from Ireland, welcome back to my channel. So I'm carrying on my retrospective on the Trump maladministration, which fortunately is over some months ago. The reign of error is over, the Lord of Misrule has been sent packing, hopefully sent to Supermax, though I don't think it's likely. So looking at the investigations into Donald Trump, the Donald was subject to numerous investigations during his 4 years in office. He ran a number of so-called charities, and he used the monies donated to these charities for such selfless acts of benefaction, like buying a portrait of himself. And there were 30 open investigations into Donald Trump late last year. I don't know how many are still ongoing. So a video of Trump being interviewed by the police several years before his inauguration came to light. It was published, and it showed him boasting how memorious he was. He's then questioned about his hypernesia. So he's only questioned in his hypernesia suddenly deserted him at a suspiciously convenient moment. He claimed to be unable to read a document because he didn't have his spectacles with him. When has anyone ever seen him wearing eyeglasses? He reads a teleprompter without one. No one ever said he wears contacts, so he couldn't read that, or he was finding it convenient to pretend he couldn't read it. Well, he's obviously subliterate, severely dyslexic, which is nothing to be ashamed of, but be open about that and let other dyslexic people say, hey, you know, he got very far in life despite dyslexia, I can too. Anyway, so Trump paid $150,000 to a Playboy model named Karen McDougal as part of a non-disclosure agreement, and the Manhattan District Attorney subpoenaed documents pertaining to that. So we all know that he's notoriously tight-fisted. Why would he pay her such a sum of money unless there wasn't something deeply shocking and shameful that she could reveal about him? In January 2019, the National Security Agency, the FBI and the CIA, they all stated with near certainty that the Russian government meddled in the election with the objective of securing the election of Donald Trump to the presidency. So Trump's campaign manager was Paul Manafort. Now, Manafort had worked in Ukraine for the former president Yanukovych, and Yanukovych was an outspokenly pro-Moscow person, and indeed he fled to Russia in 2014, where he remains to this day. So you can see that the links are very obvious here. You'd have to be a complete simpleton not to join the dots. Of course, Trump was going on his sewer of choice, which was Fox News, to pump out his bull, how this is all true and all untrue, and there was no collusion with Russia. So Fox News has done so much for the cretinization of the American right. Anyway, Michael T. Flynn was a former US military officer on the Trump team, and he was paid to go to Russia by its government. At a banquet, he had the singular honor of sharing a table with Putin. So Flynn was an advocate of deeper cooperation with Russia on all issues, and he swatted aside concerns about rampant criminality in Russia's government. It's a mafia state. So Flynn was in frequent telephone contact with the Russian ambassador in the United States in 2016. And so Flynn also broke the Logan Act by conducting private diplomacy. In case you don't know, Logan was a doctor in the late 18th century, and he came up with this law to say that no one can carry out diplomacy on part of the United States unless they have the express permission of the president, and being a diplomat would be that express permission, for instance. So that there Flynn was trying to undermine US foreign policy. And he agreed to change US foreign policy once Trump came into office. So we meant to go one government at a time. You help us get elected, and that quid pro quo, we will do various things that you want. So what do the Russians give in return for this? A promise of help. Well, we obviously know about their internet disinformation. Anyway, Trump and his suck-ups, they spread the utterly false claim that Ukraine had interfered in the election. Why? To bring to government a president who was favourable towards their deadly enemy? What? I mean, you'd have to be as moronic as a Trumpist to believe this. So, hacked emails from the DNC were passed to the Trump campaign to publish, which indeed published them. The Mueller Report said that it was questionable if this was illegal. But if it was illegal, then the Republicans were publishing stolen material. But all right, media outlets do that all the time. So the criminality wouldn't necessarily be on the Republicans unless they'd incited other people to do the stealing of it. In 2017, James Comey, he opened an investigation into Trump's collusion with the Russian government, their campaign to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election. Within days, Comey was fired. And Trump said it was because of this investigation, despite Trump's toadies had gone out to the media for a couple of days beforehand to say, no, completely unrelated to the investigation, when that was the specific reason given by Trump in an interview. I know he lies an awful lot, but sometimes he can't help himself. Even the devil can speak true sometimes, and he just blurts out the truth, even though it's deeply damaging. So you see how indisciplined he is. Anyway, an investigation into Trump was launched by a Republican named Bob Mueller. Now, Trump said that Mueller would be fair to him, which means letting him off the hook. So Trump then got worried and said the whole thing was a witch hunt. Trump repeatedly said he would love to be questioned under oath by Mueller, in which case do it. But he never ever submitted to such questioning under oath. It's doubtful that a president can be legally obliged to be questioned that way. Bill Clinton voluntarily was questioned under oath. Anyway, Mueller's failing to get Trump questioned under oath was really the downfall of his investigation. Trump would surely have perjured himself, which is why Trump's lawyers moved might and made to prevent that ever happening. And despite Trump impliedly saying that he would do it, like so many of his promises, he did not fulfill it. So the Mueller report did not exonerate Donald Trump. Mueller said it was policy not to charge a sitting president, and that's obviously that silence speaks volumes. Rather than saying no, there's no reason to charge him. Mueller produced pages of evidence of the Trump campaign's collusion with the malign and illegal activity by the Russian government. The report also gave the minutiae of Trump's countless attempts to obstruct justice. Trump had impeded investigations by withholding documents that were subpoenaed and instructing subordinates not to answer questions. The perversion of the course of the law was blatant. It was clearly criminous. It was on a huge scale. So his bids to obstruct justice were not isolated or few, but part of an enormous plan. So Bob Barr lied to Congress about the content of the Mueller report. He presented it as a total vindication of Trump, when in fact that's an absolute travesty of the truth. Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, he became a publicist for Trump. Now, Giuliani went to Ukraine to meet Andrei Derkach. Derkach is the most pro-Russian politician in Ukraine. Derkach gave him an edited recording of a Biden phone call conversation with the previous president of Ukraine, Poroshenko. So Giuliani then spread the false notion that Biden had a prosecutor sacked to get his son, Hunter Biden, out of legal jeopardy in Ukraine. So it was misleadingly edited, that audio clip. Various key Trump associates went to prison over the whole Russia affair. Michael Cohen, he purged himself when he denied that Trump had spoken to the Russian government about Trump Tower in Moscow, and obviously Cohen ended up in prison for that. Roger Stone was another consigliere. He went to prison. He too perjured himself in relation to the Russia probe. There were more and more. There was that Dutch lawyer who's married to a Russian billionaire's daughter. He went to prison for perjury too. So why did men in these positions risk prison? What was so damaging that they had to be hidden? They're committing one crime, perjury, to cover up even bigger crimes. But they wouldn't lie just for fun. There had to be some reason why they were going to risk jail. They could have simply asserted their Fifth Amendment rights and declined to answer the question. The judge in the Stone case said that Stone was prosecuted for covering up for the president. George Papadopoulos was another Trump lieutenant who ended up in jail. He'd been in London in 2016, boasting to the Australian High Commissioner, that's like ambassador, about Trump's high-level contacts with the Russian government. The High Commissioner found this so disturbing that he felt duty-bound to inform the FBI, and indeed he did so. And I've been to the bar where Papadopoulos met Alexander Downer, that Australian diplomat. So it just goes on and on. There's a superabundance of evidence of willful, knowing collaboration with the government in an attempt to wreck American democracy. So Trump demanded blind loyalty from his underlings, but loyalty is a completely one-way street with him. Once these people are no longer useful, they're discarded. He has no conscience and no compassion, and yet some people are foolish enough to trust him. The moment you can no longer be exploited, that's it. You'll be thrown out. So Cohen published a book whilst in prison, and the Trump administration, in vengeance for this, they prevented him getting early parole. A masterstroke by Trumpists was inventing the notion of a deep state conspiracy against their idol. So whenever anything went wrong, or any agents exposed Trump's rantings as a lie, or this was adduced as further evidence of the deep state, it was an unfalsifiable claim that the deep state existed, and that convinced many ignorant and weak-minded people. So Trump demanded immunity from prosecution for himself, yet he accused journalists of being seditionists, calling them enemies of the people. This is totalitarian language. Publishing something disobliging to the president is not disloyal to the nation. Dissent is patriotic. He appeared to want a lèse-majesté law. So, anyway, strange that Trump would then hug the American flag as someone who's inimical to civil liberty. It was clear that he was giving Old Glory the Judas kiss. Well, let's look at judges. He appointed hundreds of federal judges, as is his prerogative, and he was almost unique in managing to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices in only 3 years. Brad Kavanaugh was the most controversial pick, and that's because a woman came forward to allege that he attempted to rape her when she was 15 and he was 17. So the Senate held hearings on this. Now, the Senate's obviously not a court of law. It can't convict someone of rape or indeed acquit them. No one was asking the US Senate to find Kavanaugh guilty. That's beyond its remit to do so. It's not competent to sit as a court. They could simply desist from conferring upon him the greatest honour that the American legal system can bestow. Had Brad Kavanaugh not been confirmed, he would simply have carried on where he was as a federal judge. His demeanour at the hearings was deeply unseemly. He was self-pitying. He almost wept. And, the Senate's under no obligation to promote Kavanaugh, to approve him for the Supreme Court bench. The default setting is that he just stays in situ as a federal judge. There are hundreds of other federal judges who could be selected. Surely the Supreme Court justices ought to be people of unblemished reputation, who don't bring the Supreme Court into disrepute, who don't tend to undermine public trust in the judicial system. So Scottis does not want to have its name dragged through the mire. And if there's a question mark over somebody's reputation, surely someone else should be chosen instead. Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. And there's another thing. The Supreme Court is obviously largely white males. The Supreme Court didn't urgently need another one. 96% of all the people ever appointed to the Supreme Court have been white males. And 2 of Trump's 3 picks were white males. Towards the end of Obama's time, the Republicans happened upon a constitutional novelty. Their new convention was, they simply made this one up, it's an irrefrangible rule that another judge cannot be appointed in the final year of a presidential term. And this was to prevent there being another Democratic judge on SCOTUS. But when Trump was in charge, suddenly that law was thrown out. Well, not law, sorry, that invented convention. It was naked partisanship. So Trump's incipient mental illness was increasingly blatant. He's the first president to have a book written about him saying that he was deranged. There's The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health professionals assess a president. Now, previously, psychiatrists had obeyed the Goldwater rule. In 1964, some psychiatrists said the Republican candidate, Barry Goldwater, was mentally unwell. And after that, the American Psychiatric Association ruled that doctors should not assess a politician's mental health unless they'd examined the patient personally. Now, there are plenty of psychiatrists who now disagree with that because we've got so much television. People can easily watch hundreds of hours of footage of Trump's behaviour. He can't be on display mode all that time. There's other observable behaviour. Look at his conduct in terms of, Twitter screens at 3 o'clock in the morning. So the Goldwater rule had reached obsolescence, many people say, since technology had moved on. So there's ample observable behaviour, like I was saying. So many psychiatrists say it's apt to analyse the president's mental state without meeting him in person. And a Yale professor of psychiatry published a book on Donald J. Trump entitled A Duty to Warn. So tens of millions of people became Trump codependents. He seemed to induce mass psychosis amongst his acolytes. This is known as a parasocial relationship, feeling that you're in some sort of relationship with someone you actually never met. An idol figure could be someone who's dead, could be a saint or a historical figure or a soap opera character or something like that. And of course, Trump had been in reality TV long before this. So the president was labelled by this book a paranoid psychopathic narcissist who was divorced from reality. That's according to Dr. Gartner, saying he lashes out impulsively at anyone he sees as his enemies. Remember the Greek myth of Narcissus, which gave us the word narcissism, and it warns us against the perils of self-adoration. So Trump's self-obsession and constant self-praise are highly destructive. So his derangement of mind was plain for all to see. Lance Dodds, who was a former professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, well, I should say he's emeritus, he stated that the president is sociopathic. And the professor observed that the president is a stranger to reality and reason. So Professor Dodds also observed that the president lies almost ceaselessly as the conman he is. So Trump was always trying to get people to buy substandard and often non-existent goods and services, and often succeeded in doing that. So he's bereft of the least conscience. So the president, he craved love. He would not tolerate people who asked him difficult questions or dissented from his opinion. If people stood up to him, he would lose the cool, he would respond with invective, he couldn't answer questions from journalists who would ask him reasonable ones, factual questions, or for an explication of his policy. He would start ranting how terrible these people were. They worked for worthless media organizations about to go bust, even when that was provably risible. So he never even attempted to engage with the substance of the question because he couldn't, because he didn't have the cognitive wherewithal to do that. It was always ad personam, nice and nasty, quite Manichaean. Are you allies? Are you enemies? And there was really no in between with him. So he couldn't abide with anyone disagreeing with him. He would react with ire and contumely to even the mildest and the most reasoned dissent. So Trump also indulges in magical thinking. He doesn't hold beliefs on any evidentiary basis. He definitely is one to judge a book by its cover because he's so superficial himself. He falls prey to this cognitive bias, which is called the availability heuristic. So he hires people because they look very nice, as he says. So his belief is his instincts are always right. And so these instinctual judgments mean he never belongs to research an issue. He's just like Hitler, who would always make these decisions without ever looking at the files. So President Trump was incapable of ratiocination. He feels, and he doesn't think. A Florida mayor, Andrew Gillum, said that Trump was a raving lunatic. Well, that's hard to dispute. Mayor Gillum, well, was using a psychiatric terminology as part of political vituperation, but I think it's probably quite close to being medically true. So anyway, so in Trump's case, I think a demotic version of mentally ill was suitable, even if it didn't quite meet the psychiatric definition. I'm not a doctor, so I could be dead wrong. I'm a layman. But, there are some things which are so obvious, anybody could diagnose them. I don't need to be a doctor to recognise the sight of blood or to diagnose a sneeze. Anyway, so Trump called himself the King of the Jews in 2019. It's a title mockingly attributed to Jesus Christ on the cross. But Trump's messianic delusion did not stop there. He called himself the Chosen One. He drew a halo over his head whilst looking to the heavens. One might have assumed that Christian fundamentalists would be mortally offended by such open blasphemy, but for some reason Christian extremists chose to disapply their exacting moral standards to Trump. He has got this unique grace from them. So President Trump, he cancelled a scheduled trip to Denmark because the country's Prime Minister shot down Trump's preposterous proposition about buying Greenland, right? So he came up with such ludicrous ideas. He suddenly decided that he was going to purchase it. Denmark never said it was for sale. What about the people who live there? The Prime Minister rightly said that the idea the United States would purchase Greenland was absurd. So Trump was very upset with the Prime Minister saying something so reasonable and obviously true. Trump was triggered. He kept saying it was a nasty word. Well, you saying you can buy part of our country is nasty. As though Trump never said anything nasty. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. What a crybaby. Talk about a snowflake. So anyway, Barack Obama was also due to visit Denmark. Trump knew that the African American would receive a rapturous reception, and Trump would not. And that would have been an unbearable humiliation for a man of his raging vanity. So Kim Jong-un rightly said that Trump was a mentally deranged dotant. But So Kemp is a vile tyrant, but he is right occasionally. So Trump riposted saying, "You're a little rocket man." The epithet little is the worst barb in Trump's narrow verbal arsenal. That's because he's fixated with size. A man who's so profoundly insecure about that remark, about small hands, when someone said that, it suppurates with him decades later. It still rankles. So Trump stood on a stage in front of these Pharisaical Republicans, these prairie Puritans, and boasted about the size of his penis. Wow. They forgave him, despite his utter unrepentance. Donald J. has succeeded in inducing this mass psychosis amongst the party faithful. Why would a man feel impelled to boast about the size of his male member? It would not suggest it's large. Presumably he suffers from a deep-seated and crushing sense of inadequacy. The lady doth protest too much. So despite changing his views on a whole range of issues, Trump never seems to rue his misjudgments. He doesn't express regret or remorse over mistakes or insults. He simply moves on. But he has the capacity to absolve. All people have to do is perform abject obeisance before him. Shameless sycophancy will get you everywhere with Trump. And so for a trained intelligence officer like Putin, it's very easy to see his psychological pressure points, and you can manipulate him. So the president, he addressed the Republican Party. The Republican Party used to be principled anti-communists. But all this opposition to North Korean tyranny was thrown out in return for one grovelling epistle from Kim Jong-un. So Trump told the party faithful he'd performed a volte-face on Kim Jong-un. He said, "Then we fell in love. He sent me beautiful letters. They're great letters. We fell in love." That is a direct quotation. Nauseating. The cruelest, most savage tyrant on the planet, and Trump fell in love with him. And the Republican Party didn't call him out for that? Shocking. Can you imagine if Obama had said that about a dictator who was even a quarter as bad, what the Republicans would say? Wow. Words fail me. It's just nauseating. So words mean so much to Trump. He cancelled a trip to NATO over one word, a trip to a NATO democracy. He performed a complete about-face on North Korea in return for a few words, despite there being no evidence whatsoever that North Korean nuclear weapons would be dismantled, and indeed they haven't been. So Trump seemed to be a sadist. He derived gratification from inflicting pain and rubbing someone else's nose in the dirt, metaphorically speaking. The president was unable to form real relationships. People are just tools to him, including his wife and children. So they'll be jettisoned as soon as they can no longer be exploited. He was loyal to his consigliere only so long as they were utile. And as soon as they're no longer useful, they're thrown out. So anyway, so he would denounce people. He would say they were wicked, that he hardly knew them if they became an embarrassment to him. So his niece, Dr. Mary Trump, a psychologist, confirmed all this. He was always like that in private. So Donald J. was incapable of loving anyone except himself. It was only about himself. And his camarilla, as I pointed out, consisted of several criminals. So some of them ended up in prison. So Trump has long since lost touch with reality. Remember in 2015, Bill Clinton said that Trump was fact-free, and that was long before Bill Clinton knew that his wife and Trump were actually going to be going head-to-head. So Trump couldn't tell fact from fantasy. His grandiosity was off the scale. He always spoke in superlatives. He was the greatest, the rich, the best, the smartest, even the tallest. He claimed to be 6'3", when that was provably false. He's 6'1". He was compelled to incessantly broadcast his supposed accomplishments, physical attributes, talents, and all the rest of it. Why do most Americans not find this sickening? Perhaps some do. So that is his trademark, bombast. So anyway, he made several parapraxes. When he's speaking about the economy, he said, "I have the best economy. I defeated the caliphate." So he conflated the United States with himself. And he probably wasn't misspeaking, because the president appeared to believe that the country is a mere adjunct of himself. For Trump, l'état, c'est moi. Even though, as we know, the president's actually got a limited ability to make the economy better or worse. Anyway, all this expert opinion had absolutely zero effect on tens of millions of Trump's fanatical supporters. They're extremely closed-minded. Well, their minds are just hermetically sealed to proof. Education, experience, and scientific data have no dissuasive effect on them whatsoever. Doesn't diminish their adoration for a man who was determined to bilk them. So, Dr. Mary Trump, the president's niece, had an intimate knowledge of him and a PhD in psychology, and this put her in a unique position to assess his state of mind, what access she had. In her book Too Much and Never Enough, she limbed his infinite desire for kudos and laudation. His unceasing crowing about his supposedly grandiose accomplishments and toughness is aimed at an audience of one, his late father, who died almost 50 years ago. The spectre of Trump's father haunts Donald Trump daily. How can he ever live up to his father's expectations? And how can he ever live down his embarrassing vices, his litany of public calamities and infidelities? So Trump's mental impairment is only going to aggravate with age. To think that he's mulling over another presidential run in 2024 fills me with horror, though later on see my video about his chances if he stands again. That's enough, so please follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and please donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Callahan is spelled Callaghan. Toodaloo.